Okay, well, welcome to the final seminar for our Tranquility meditation sessions. Today we'll do a seminar review just of everything that we've covered beforehand, and then the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. So you'll have an idea of the historical foundations for what we are doing. The practical will be class discussion on this, and we'll use the CD, and we'll do some practical meditation again, just to remind you what it's all about. Okay? Again, of course, materials are all available out there on the website. If you brought a jump drive, I'll download all the materials here. Okay? Otherwise, you can just go download them for yourself off the website. Does anybody need to see that?
Yes.
The website? Okay, so the website is here. Okay, so there's the Narrowgate Alliance. NarrowgateAlliance.org. Alright, and over here is Tranquility Meditation. So once you go there, you'll have all of the PDF files that are available. Okay? So that'll have all the class materials, and then down here are the audio files. Okay, remember not to listen to them while you're driving. Okay, so you can download those. And then the bibliographies are down here. The versions of the video. Okay? And then you can just, like I said, you can right click on all the files, right click, and you'll see you can do all of these things. If you're going to save it, what you're going to do is I would just like open the link in a new tab and let it download. If it's a PDF file. And then what you've got is you've got the PDF bar, this little drop-down menu over here. Just click on Save, and it'll bring up the drop-down menu for saving it. Just save it right to wherever you want it. Do that with the audio files as well. Okay? Any other questions? All right. Okay, here are the main topics that we have discussed so far. We talked about the psychophysiological coherence of the organism itself, which is produced by reducing the breath rate down to 3 breaths a minute, and having each breath consist of 5 seconds inhalation and 15 seconds exhalation. Ideal. That's just sort of the model to look at. So if you've got one breath every 20 seconds, and you have an in-breath of 5 seconds and an out-breath of 15 seconds, that automatically synchronizes the breathing, the heart rate, and the brainwave frequency in an alpha state. Automatically, where that's a design feature. That is the way this organism is designed. So the minute the breathing drops below 3 breaths a minute, well, the minute it drops below 6 breaths a minute, 1 breath every 10 seconds, we start to get the synchronization effect. It becomes very pronounced and very coherent at 3 breaths a minute. Okay? So the basis of everything that we are doing here arises because of this psychophysiological coherent state. Now, the Buddha and the ancients did not, of course, understand it in these terms. All they knew was that if they reduced their breathing by any means, they would get this altered consciousness, this altered awareness. And so all of the methods that they developed were simply designed to produce this altered consciousness. What we now know is that in each instance, it is in general simply doing something that will allow their breathing to slow down. And once it crosses that magical threshold of 6 breaths a minute, they start to get the consciousness shift. And once it drops down to 3 breaths a minute, then they get this radically coherent state, which then is the springboard off into these mystical places. Okay? So all we have to do is find a simple, direct way of reducing the breathing to 3 breaths a minute and having an in-breath of 5 seconds and an out-breath of 15 seconds. The simplest way to do that is to hum. Once you begin to hum, that process will begin to slow down the breathing, and after about 5 minutes of that, you'll be, somewhere close to the 3-to-1 ratio of in-breath to out-breath. Okay, so you don't have to worry about it, just hum. And the body, with its wonderful design feature, will automatically take you right where you need to be. Okay? The meditative absorptions are the Buddha's description of the distance, essentially, from the external world. Remember that our basic ontological understanding of reality is that there are two substances. A thinking substance, which we are, and the extended substance, which is the body and everything out there. All right? So what we are doing when we are engaging in these practices to produce this coherent state, what we are doing is we are beginning the process of separating ourselves, the thinking substance which we are, from the inputs of the avatar and the rest of the external world. That's what we're doing. Now, in the ancient language, which we'll take a look at today, he just talks about literally distancing yourself from all of that. Okay? So that's what we're doing. In the ancient mystery religions, they describe this process as the traveling to Hades, traveling to the underworld. All right? Later on, that was specified by Socrates and Plato as practicing death. That's what we're doing. We're practicing death. Okay? Which is the core of everything. If you can practice death, then you can have access to all of these additional realms of being. Because what it does is it separates the thinking substance which you are from the avatar and the extended world and puts you in contact with all of these spiritual dimensions. So, the 8 meditative absorptions describe the 8 stages whereby the thinking substance which we are distances itself in 8 successive dimensions from the extended universe. So the further away we are from this place here, the closer we are to home, basically. And when we reach the 8th meditative absorption, we are simply dwelling in that place where thinking substances dwell, where there is no relationship whatsoever to the extended world. All right, so the further we get away, the more everything that we're familiar with drops away. Okay? Dualist interactionism is the current scientific model based on neuroscience, neuroanatomy, and quantum mechanics. Dr. John C. Eccles, Nobel Prize winner, he won the Nobel Prize. He shared it with two other people in 1961, early 60s, for his work on the way that the synapse, the synaptic gap itself, on the way that the information is transmitted across the synaptic gap. All right, specifically it is transmitted in the form of neurochemicals, neurotransmitters. So the electrical energy of the synaptic charge itself is converted into chemicals, and those chemicals are then ejected across the synaptic gap. They're picked up on the other side and translated again into electrical energy, and that continues throughout the entire transmission chain. So that was what he won the Nobel Prize for. So he suggests that at the very fine microstructures of the neocortex itself, we will find a physical method, a physical model that will allow us to understand how a thinking substance, which has no matter, no mass, no location, no temporality, no nothing that is material in any way, can interact with a material object like this. Okay? So he's suggesting that it has to be at those microstructures at the quantum level, all right, which is why this organism is so important to us. We cannot interact with one of these. Okay? We cannot interact with this directly. We have to interact through the nervous system. All right? So that's one of the reasons why this organism is so important, because it provides us access to the extended world through this interface. So that's dualist interactionism. This is your avatar. Okay? You are not your avatar. Your avatar is an instrument, a very complex, incredibly complex instrument. But you are not the avatar. You are something entirely different. Meditation will show you that. Meditation will demonstrate that to you. Because as you enter into the meditative absorptions, this thing falls away. And you are left suspended in a timeless, non-local, non-temporal, non-material space. And ultimately, at the eighth meditative absorption, time and space vanish. Okay? Those are constructs of this particular organism. Space and time are constructs of the nervous system. Okay? And are not, in that sense, real. Okay? Obviously, they're real in some sense, but they're not absolutely real. And so the thinking substance which we are as we practice meditation will get further and further and further away from its interaction with the organism, with the avatar, and pretty soon you're just there. That's just you. There's no material substance supporting you, there's no body, there's no space, there's no time, there's none of those kinds of things are going on. And then you will discover for yourself the fact that you are not the avatar. Okay? The avatar is an instrument, a very complex instrument, like I said, which we utilize in order to interact with the four-dimensional space-time continuum. But we are not our avatars. Okay? We talked about Buddhist and Gnostic soteriology, and all of the ancient mystery religions, and in particular Buddhism and Gnosticism, focus our attention on the dangers and the suffering of this particular place. All right? And so they say this place is, in some sense, inadequate. There's too much pain, there's too much suffering, there's too much violence, there's too much, this and that. And so, clearly, because we are a thinking substance and not a material substance, we have to come from somewhere else. And that somewhere else is this transmundane world out there. Now, for the Buddhist, it's just a matter of recognizing the fact that there is pain and suffering as long as we do not understand that we are not our avatar. Once we know that we're not the avatar, then pain and suffering pretty much fall away. Not that we don't experience it anymore, but that we understand that it is just a feature of the avatar and has nothing really to do with our essence. We do not suffer. The avatar suffers. And it suffers because it is part of this mundane world that is in the constant process of becoming. Okay? It never stands still. It is always changing, always moving into some other configuration, always moving from what it is towards what it's going to be, and ultimately, of course, moving from what it is into what it is not, because it will ultimately collapse and die. Everything here dies. Everything here is destroyed. Okay? Not destroyed, it's rearranged. Let's put it that way. Okay? The conservation laws say that you can either create or destroy matter or mass or energy, but it can be transmuted. It can change its form, and that's what happens. So that's why all of this suffering and everything accrues to the avatar, because it is part of the material world. So the Buddhist just reminds us of that and says, hey, go practice meditation, find the 8th meditative absorption, and recognize that you're home now. You can go back anytime you want and re-engage with another avatar and explore this four-dimensional space-time continuum if you want, or you can just hang out at home, where there's no pain, there's no suffering, where you're basically God. All right? Now, the Gnostic soteriology takes that basic idea and adds a little more drama to it, because they suggest that here we are hanging out in our godlike place, this transmundane universe out there, which is where the 8th meditative absorption takes us, and where we belong. And there are these demigods who are insane, jealousy and rage at the fact that we are happy in our little heavenly place. And so they snatch us out of heaven and throw us down to this mundane world and encapsulate us, imprison us in this flesh prison, and then torture us eternally for their own amusement. Okay? So these insane demigods have imprisoned us here for the sole purpose of torturing us, according to the Gnostics. And so our objective is to wake up, recognize that we don't belong here, recognize that we've been kidnapped, recognize that we are godlike, and go back home. And leave this place and the archons, which is the name of the insane demigods, leave them behind. Let them torture each other instead of torturing us. Okay, again, we're having a sort of, like I said, this is a little more dramatic than the Buddhist version, because there are these archons with which we have to contend. But it's the same point. There is the world, the extended universe out there, which, because it is constantly changing its form, is necessarily accompanied by pain and suffering. And then there's us, non-local, non-temporal, non-material, godlike. And so we forget who we are because we're encased in this. We interact with this avatar at such a personal, such an intimate level, that we forget that we're not this avatar, and that we really don't have any kind of relationship to the extended world of pain and suffering, except through the avatar. And so we tolerate that, we put up with that, in order to be with each other, in order to be with our families, in order to, do whatever it is that we want to do in the extended world. But once we practice the meditative absorptions and go back home, we can always traverse back and forth between the two realms at will. Okay? The cemetery contemplations were the first meditative practice that the initiate was provided. For 30 days and 30 nights, he or she would sit on the cemetery plains, where all of the bodies, old and young, sick and whatever, were decaying and in various stages of decay. Okay? And so you would just sit there for 30 days and 30 nights and sleep with them and walk around and observe them and smell them and touch them if you wanted to, just to remind yourself that that's what this thing is made of, and that sooner or later this thing is going to look just like that thing. All right? So it is part of the way of stimulating the person to recognize what they are, and also to stimulate them to take up the burden of the practice of meditation, because meditation is not easy. And so in order to keep reminding ourselves why we meditate, you would go back to the cemetery plains every now and then, and just remind yourself. Now, we don't have cemetery plains anymore here. Instead, we have movies and television programs that show gory violence, death, destruction, mutilation, all those kinds of things. So we don't have to go out of our living rooms in order to practice the cemetery contemplations. Just watch a good horror movie. All right? Because it's the same thing. Those images you see up there should remind you that this avatar will, in fact, come to a gruesome, nasty, ugly, vicious, horrible end, no matter what. I mean, that's just the way it is. And that should remind us why it is that we're practicing our meditation. The assumption of the God forms was developed by the ancients in order to guide their meditative practice. They would create God forms. So all of the representations of the ancient gods that we have in pictures and sculptures, wherever in the hieroglyphics of the Egyptians, wherever we see those God forms, they were not primitive representations of what they believed to be the natural world. They were specifically created artistic creations representing specific psychodynamic principles. And they were then used in meditative practice by the ancient mystery religions in order to develop the primary skills that you would need to have in order to practice meditation. And in order to practice meditation effectively, you have to have will, you have to have imagination, you have to have memory. Okay? You have to have a powerful will, you have to have a powerful imagination, and you have to have a powerful memory. And so in order to develop will, imagination, and memory, they created the God forms, and then you would meditate on those God forms. You would imagine yourself as that God form. You would assume that God form. and move from God form to God form to God form to God form as you develop your will, your imagination, and your memory. Okay? Everybody clear about that? Okay, good. That's what, and it's important. Those ancient representations are not the result of a primitive mind trying to contemplate the natural world. They were far, far, far ahead of that. All right, this is very powerful hypnosis, basically, is what this is. The Imitatio Christi is the Christian version of the assumption of the God forms. Now, the way that it is described, and it starts to be described around the 2nd century CE, and we get good descriptions of it from St. Augustine, and then we get further elaborations of it with St. Thomas, and then St. Anselm and some of the others. They're also talking about all of this stuff. And what they're doing is they're saying you should imitate the life of Christ by, helping the poor, by helping the sick, by not having a lot of wealth, by doing all of these things that the historical Christ was supposed to have done in his lifetime. However, behind that, that's the exoteric version. Behind that is the esoteric version where, what do? You imitate Christ. What did Christ do? What did
He helped the poor.
No. What did he do spiritually?
Oh.
Yeah, died on the cross and then?
He rose in the heaven.
Exactly. In other words, he practiced death. Split his consciousness off from the body and then returned. Okay? So that's what this is all about. Imitating the God form. That's what the Imitatio Christi is. Okay? For the exoteric version of it, for the people who are not initiated into the mysteries, you give them a story and you tell them you should go out and do what Jesus did. And those people will very willingly go out and try to do what Jesus did, and they will waste their lives. Okay? Because they'll never get any closer to the spiritual understanding of what the Christ mythos is all about. Which, of course, was fine for the people who were telling them the exoteric version. Because they wanted them distracted, and they wanted them poor, and they wanted them in the streets. They didn't want them practicing all of these powerful techniques to gain willpower, imagination, and memory, because if you have willpower, imagination, and memory, you're a threat. So that's why we have the exoteric and the esoteric versions of all of these stories. Koan meditation is a Zen kind of meditation. Zen, the Chinese, the originators of Zen meditation, and the Japanese developed meditation upon phrases. Okay, now the mantra meditation from way back when is a version of it, but they actually had phrases and rhythms that they used. And so it's very simple to take a koan, and you enter the meditative state, you enter the psychophysiologically coherent state, and then you slowly speak the words of the koan again and again and again and again. And insight will arise from that practice. Okay? And this is also what the ancient Gnostics and the Christians were doing. That's what most of the contents of the New Testament are. They are little aphorisms that they used with koan meditation and the Imitatio Christi. So the New Testament itself is actually an esoteric Christian and a Gnostic teaching manual. That's what most of it is. And so we selected John 14 for our koan meditation, for our ancient Christian Gnostic koan meditation. Okay, for I am the way, the truth, and the life. Okay? Now, we then wanted to take a look at some modern interpretations of meditation. Psychodynamic structure of the, we're looking at psychoanalysis at this point. And the psyche, according to psychoanalysis, is broken up into three separate divisions: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the primitive part that is responsible for all of the energy, all of the instinct, all of the drive that we have. The ego is, of course, the part of our personality that is directed outward, that is directed towards the external reality. And the superego is the moral structures that we are given by our parents and other authority figures. All right? There are 3 different types of psychodynamic ego states. We can have a normal ego state, which is perfectly focused on reality, whatever that reality happens to be at the moment. We can have a regressed, which is a temporary state regressing back to an earlier state of development. Okay? Or we can have a fixated, which is more or less permanent without psychoanalysis or some kind of meditative intervention, where we are permanently fixated and locked into an earlier developmental stage. Okay? Freud also talked about religion as an illusion, suggesting that it was nothing more than an institutionalized version of obsessive compulsive behaviors in order to ward off feelings of anxiety, guilt, shame, depression in the face of a world that is cruel, vicious, nasty, and brutish. So we band together with each other and practice all of these rituals and say all of these things and sing all of these songs and do all of these things so that temporarily we forget the fact that we live in a vicious, nasty, brutish world. Okay? So that's basically what he is suggesting is going on here. He also suggested that mysticism is not contacting some transmundane world, but is simply returning to a really early developmental stage when we had an oceanic feeling while we were hanging out in our mother's wombs. That was his suggestion that all of this is. Okay, now keep in mind that he is coming at these descriptions from a materialist, a strict determinist, materialist, atheistic standpoint. Okay? But I thought it would be interesting to take a look at this because it's always a good idea to keep in the back of our minds the fact that we may be deluding ourselves. All right? Always keep that as a check. Am I being deluded at this point in my meditative development? Because that is a guide that will help guide us and keep us on the straight and narrow path. Because there are bunches of delusions out there that we can get trapped in. And we can just, sit there and spin our wheels for decades and make no progress whatsoever. So we have to keep in mind that we may be deluding ourselves. And one of the ways we can do that is by checking to see if we're locked in some kind of behavior of the avatar. Is this just a feeling that the avatar has created? Okay? Chakra meditation is an example of that. Here we are manipulating the actual energy fields of the avatar itself, which is beneficial, okay, healthy, but is also going to keep us locked at the level of the avatar and not let us leave and head off back to home. So that's why I brought in all of this stuff. Keep in mind, we can be easily deluded. We can be easily distracted. We can easily, really easily be just sort of locked in this self-perpetuating loop. All right? Last time we talked about, one of our members talked about, talking to trees and doing things like that. Again, these are kinds of experiences we can have. They are valuable for their own sake, but they are not the end goal. And if we get stopped by that, if we just hang out talking to trees or hang out, manipulating the energy fields of the avatar, we're never going to make any progress. And when the avatar finally succumbs to the, inevitable transformation of energies that it will face, we will be stuck here while it decays. All right? So that is one of the things that the Buddha also warned about. Wanted to talk about behaviorism, and we talked about the way that we are manipulated, that our behaviors are controlled by managing the contingencies of reinforcement and by managing the schedules of reinforcement in the external world. Okay? Behaviorism is a science that is devoted towards the manipulation of human behavior and animal behavior in general. All right? It is very effective, incredibly effective. Because the avatar is in fact an animal structure, it is subject to behavioral principles. We're not. The thinking substance which we are is not, but the avatar is. It responds to contingencies of reinforcement. It responds to schedules of reinforcement. It responds to behavioral manipulations. All right? So we have to be aware of that. It's very hard to override those. All right? one of the modern methods, well, I don't want to say modern methods, because Sufism goes all the way back to the beginning. In modern days, we have champions of Sufism, like G.I. Gurdjieff, who are focused on breaking these behavioral chains, these patterns of behaviors that are conditioned by, you know, the environment in which we find ourselves. So Sufism is specifically designed as a cure, right, for behavioral manipulation. And that's why we wanted to take a look at the Sufis. Okay, any questions about all of that? Or comments, or anything that you wanted to add to the discussion?
Well, mine is, all this has brought a different way of thinking. Approaching to things.
Yes, yeah, we have to, yeah, and we'll see how this applies to the Noble Eightfold Path as we get into that.
It seems like I was going this way now, and I'm thinking, well, the thing is, I'm still going that way, it's just that I'm looking at it in a different perspective. And some of it, I can comprehend, I agree. Others, I still have to think about. Another one is, feel like I'm rejecting. He says, I'm not quite sure that it makes sense to me. And this is, I can see why they put it out there. And this is, but a lot of it, basically, this whole thing has come up. The reason for the meditation is going back to the point, taking this class, was for the avatar to feel better. So a lot of it is based on my avatar. Right? This is the pain, pleasure,
Sure.
the whole thing. And this is, but the background of it, I went, okay.
Well, right, and it's yeah, I mean, if we simply focus on the techniques which allow us to temporarily suspend or modify feelings of pain and suffering, that has temporary benefit. Okay? And these are very powerful techniques which will, in fact, modify, suspend, alter our feelings of pain and suffering temporarily. Okay? But, again, if we do not pursue the final end goal, which is the 8th meditative absorption and the return to home, then ultimately the techniques will have been wasted because we will be stuck here.
Yeah, now that's the point where I get a little lost.
Okay.
Because in my mind, the 8th form, it is death.
It is.
The final frontier, or whatever you want to call it, is just, it sounds to me like to return home, as your expression, is to leave everything behind.
To leave all of this behind. Yes.
Correct. Well, the only way to leave all of this behind is to die.
Well, actually, no. You can die and still stay here.
Now, that's the point that is
Yeah.
confusing me.
Yeah, see, because, yeah.
You see, that's what you're saying, is to leave it up. This is so, I feel like, the confusing part is, okay, I'm still here, but I can still go there.
If you practice, if you know how to get there.
Okay.
Okay, if you, again, it's like Socrates said, I know how to get there because I've been there many, many times. So I know it like I know the streets of Athens. I know the process of going home. Okay, now the thing about it is, if we identify with the avatar and the extended universe, and if we think that that's all that there is, we will not attempt to leave it. We'll simply hang out here as a disembodied mind, as a disembodied spirit. And then sooner or later, we will be attracted to another avatar, and then we will go through this whole thing again and again and again and again. Now, each time we engage with another avatar, we are forced into a situation where we must relearn everything that we had learned before. and we have to relearn it in a new language, in a new epoch, in a new culture, in a new time frame, all of these kinds of things. So again, we're wasting time.
So we get caught in a loop.
We get caught in a loop again and again and again and again because we don't know that we can just go home.
Okay.
Okay, and keep in mind that from the Gnostic perspective, every minute we spend here or anywhere near here, we are being tortured and manipulated by the archons for their own benefit.
So the lesson they want us to learn is through meditation, get to know home,
We'll get to be able to go home,
and
yes.
that is our truth.
Well,
that
home is completely different. Once we are home, this place will take on the aspect of an absolute nightmare that we want to forget.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll see the illusion.
Yes, well, yeah, illusion, yeah. Illusion is a translation of the Sanskrit term Maya. Maya is the weaver, okay? So what we have is not necessarily an illusion, because that's a pretty powerful illusion,
Yeah.
okay? What we have is we have the weaving of this place, which then traps us like a spider's web.
Correct.
Okay, and so what we need to do is we need to recognize the fact that we don't have to stay here and be tortured. We can simply leave and go home.
So that's the whole purpose of the meditation.
Yes.
Is to get us home.
Yeah, to get us home, to remind us who we are, and to allow us to separate the thinking substance which we are from the avatar, and begin to distance ourselves from it through the successive meditative absorptions. And remember that on the Gnostic model, the Ogdoadic model that the Buddhist Noble Eightfold Path is based on, each one of those represents one of the planetary spheres. So we start off home, which is transmundane and outside of this universe. And then we are snatched and thrown in through each of the successive 7 spheres. All right? And each time we pass through one of those spheres, we accumulate more mass, more matter. And so by the time we're here, we've come through 8 different phases, and we've accumulated more and more matter until finally we're encased in this flesh prison, and we really forget who we are. We're wandering around in a waking sleep, in a coma, forgetting who we are, forgetting that we are in fact gods and should be home, here tortured for the benefit of the archons. And so each of the meditative absorptions takes us back one sphere, until finally we leave altogether this creation of the archons, which should not exist at all according to the Gnostics. The only reason it's here is because we're here. If all of us were to leave, this place would vanish, because the archons themselves cannot maintain it. They can only manipulate it. We are the source of the energy that maintains this place. Okay? Yes. So if we all were to leave and go home, this place would simply collapse. It would just vanish. And the archons would vanish with it, which is why they are desperate to keep us here. And why they are desperate to torture us and confuse us at every level so that we don't wake up, recognize we can leave, all of us leave, and then they're gone. So that's the Gnostic cosmology. Okay? So that's where we get all of these ideas from, all of, the 8, the model of 8, is because of the 7 planetary spheres from the ancient astrotheology. So each time we move one level further away from the material world, we are moving one planetary sphere closer to home, until finally on the 8th level we just step off and we're home again. And then we can always come back if we want, reconnect with the avatar, hang out, tell people, help people, do whatever we want to do, because we have now gone all the way home and we can come back and forth
So
at will.
A meditation is a roadmap to home.
Yes, exactly. Meditation.
That's not meaning that it doesn't want the avatar to die. It just wants it to know that self is home.
Right.
Go home.
Well, the avatar. Remember, the avatar is a construct.
Right.
Okay. It itself is a construct of 30 trillion or so cells very complex, like I said, incredibly complex. That permits us access to this four-dimensional space-time. Okay, it is a temporary construct, which is one of the difficulties that we face. Because of its temporary nature, we're only here in this particular avatar for a very short while. And so this presents difficulties for us, even if the cosmology is not correct. It still presents difficulties for us as thinking substances, because we have to cope with the fact that this avatar is temporary.
And it's gonna die.
Yeah, it will in fact, sooner or later the energy matrix which holds it together will fail. And there will be a transformation of that energy matrix, and this this complex structure will simply collapse back into its constituent elements. Okay? And there's nothing that we can do, nothing that the thinking substance, which we are, can do to stop that process, because the stuff of which this is composed is part of the material world, which is the world of becoming, which is the world of constant change and constant transformation. It is the essence of that place to change constantly and continuously. So we're still stuck with the problem of continuity between incarnations, or of continuity, of the thinking substance outside of an avatar. Okay, regardless of the cosmology we adopt. The ancient cosmology was directed towards this transmundane universe where we really belong. That is, the world of thinking substances. Okay?
I can see where they came from, because they had just recently left it.
Right, and exactly, they were taking they were.
And then they got stuck here.
Yeah.
And uh-oh, now how do we get
Right, and how do we get home? How do we get home? So that's, again, that's the fundamental process that we are learning. And we learn it very simply by entering the coherent state, and then from there, just continuously practicing it until we have found our way back. Because the way will open itself in front of us. As we meditate, the way opens. And then we say, oh, cool. And we move a little further. We move further into one of the
stages?
yeah, exactly, one of the deeper meditative absorptions, until finally we're home. Okay? So once you're in the meditative state, then the first meditative absorption will occur almost automatically. Don't have to worry about it. And then from there, the next one comes into view, and you'll be able to see where it is. And then you just work until you get there, and can go there anytime you want. And then from there, you'll be able to see the third one, and then the fourth one, and then finally all the way back to the eighth one. So it's just a process of exploration, basically. Okay? So that's what we're learning how to do. And keep in mind that this is, with the exception of the cosmology, these are process instructions. There's no content here. It's just telling you not what to think, but how to think. How to do something. In this case, how to perform the 8 meditative absorptions. And we start off with just a simple psychophysiologically coherent state, which will then automatically take us to the first absorption, and from there, we can then begin to see, like, crossing the mountains. Each time you get to a new plateau, you'll see the next peak, and then you'll know how to get there. And then you're at that peak, and you'll say, oh, okay, there's the next one. And then you can't see them all from, the first meditative absorption, because you're too far away. Then move to the second, which you can see, then you'll see the third. Then move to that one, then you'll see the fourth. So we can just find our way back home, because the way is already there. Okay, if we do not get distracted by all of these other things that are going on. That's the one thing that we have to keep in mind. There's a lot of stuff going on out in these meditative absorptions. There's a lot of things happening, and we can get distracted by all of this stuff. All right, anything else before we move on? Did that help clarify?
Yeah, it a little more, less lost.
Yeah.
I have to think about
Yeah.
things, so to process
Sure.
it.
Sure,
And
sure.
this is it. But it makes a little more sense, because at first look, it sounded to me like it was, how can I say it, promoting death.
Oh, yeah, I can see, exactly.
And I go, this is,
Yeah.
well, death is a little scary for me right now.
Well, that is only because we have not practiced
That's it, it's such a nice.
Exactly, and see, so that's why we have to confront the fact that the avatar is going to, in fact, fail us at some point.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the ones I had to think about for a
Mhm.
while, the cemetery thing.
Mm-hmm,
And this is, in what you were saying about shows and then horror shows, well, I even see it in, police shows.
oh, yeah,
CSI.
yeah,
And I always have seen myself as, that I'll be sitting there and I'm a standby, as the victim. I never see myself as the hero, I always see myself like,
Right, and-
I'll be sitting there and then bullets fly and I'm the one that gets hit.
yeah,
And then
Yeah.
they open my body and they see all these things and this is and how and why
Yeah.
and then they find out the killer was aiming at somebody else. So I
right,
can't do that.
exactly, exactly.
But again, I contemplate, it was funny that I see myself as the victim more
Mhm.
than I see. So I know the first thing that hits me with that cemetery is that I'm going to die,
Mm-hmm. Right.
sooner or later.
So, sooner or later, the avatar will in fact return to its natural state.
And I get stuck at that point,
Yeah, well, that's why we're meditating.
yeah.
So we know what's after that.
Yeah.
Once we've gotten to the, I would say once we are at the second meditative absorption, which is relatively easy to get to, then we can feel, we can experience the fact that we are not the avatar.
Yeah, but that's a big wall.
Well, but it's not, it's automatic, it happens. The minute you get that psychophysiologically coherent state, the process is on way.
Yeah.
It's already there.
But what I'm trying to say that is I start the meditation, but that fear. is
Oh,
that
okay.
I hit that wall and say, I'm gonna die, and I'm going, okay.
Okay.
Then I start thinking, okay, I'm going to heaven or hell.
Mhm.
Am I gonna die of cancer or this? And anyway, just, I
Yeah.
go different directions.
That's okay.
Instead, trying to quiet the mind, that, okay, you're not gonna die,
Mhm.
and go to, and
Right.
go to the next level.
Right.
It is a hard walk.
It is difficult, yes. And that is, a lot of people will get stuck at that level and
Yeah.
simply abandon the
And I could see
practice.
why it took 30 days to think about it.
Yes, 30 days of immersion, basically, in that. And remember the Hagakure meditation, the Zen meditations for the Zen warriors. Meditate every day on the most horrible ways that you think you could die today. Again, to get us over that fear, to get us over that conditioned response to, to the concept of dying.
And wasn't there one of them that says that it took 7 years, 5 to 7 years to even get to the next level?
Yeah, we find this concept of 7 again and again and again. The Buddha himself talks about 7 years. He's talking in the context of becoming a non-returner, that is an entity that does not need to come back and reincarnate, reattach itself to an avatar, but is waiting to move on and go home. And he says after 7 years of practice, the meditator will certainly be a non-returner. And then he says, no, after 7 months. I said, no, actually you can probably become a non-returner after 7 weeks, then 7 days, 7 hours, 7 minutes. So the concept of 7 occurs again and again and again as well. According to the tradition, he took 6 years. Bodhidharma in the, when was he, 7th century AD? Whenever he was, I have to go check the dates again. He took 7 years. Remember our discussion with Plotinus, he, from the Greek perspective, he practiced continuously and had achieved this, separation completely about 6 times in his lifetime. So even, practiced meditators sometimes have difficulty achieving the final end goal.
Now, the last part that you're talking about, that's what you're going to discuss today.
Yes.
The breaking
Yes.
of this conditioning.
Yeah, breaking of the conditioning of the fear of death. Okay? And we are conditioned,
Oh,
yeah, we're conditioned, to respond to, that concept. Not only, we're naturally conditioned that way. We have a survival instinct. The avatar has a survival instinct. Okay?
that's why we're wearing clothes.
Absolutely, that's exactly. So this is not a trivial issue. Okay. So, the Noble Eightfold Path leading to the extinction of pain and suffering. And we've already talked about why practice it, and then we'll just discuss a little bit about how, and then we'll actually do so. Let me change that. Okay, any other questions or comments? Complex scientific tyranny the world has ever seen. In 1953, Bertrand Russell gave a series of 8 lectures to the up-and-coming leaders over in Britain. And he opens the first lecture by saying, and the collection was called The Effect of Science on Society, the impact of science on society. And so he opens it up by saying, you know, if Napoleon's secret police had had the scientific technology that we have now, we would all be speaking French. Okay? Because they had to go out and actually spy on people physically if they wanted to get information. And they had to set up these complex spy networks to go out and have everybody spy on each other. And since everybody knew what they were doing, it was pretty easy to evade and to avoid and to recognize, because you could see it coming a mile away. So they only had about like a 3% efficiency rate. And that 3% was enough to, make Napoleon the danger that he was, and make him the emperor of France and that huge expanding empire that he had. Okay? So imagine that kind of a situation with all of the technological advancements that we have now in 1953, is what Russell is saying. And he's saying we will utilize all of these techniques, all of the film, all of the TV, all of the radio, all of the psychology, along with the needle, along with food, along with propaganda, along with all of these other things, the spy satellites and the phones that track where you're going, and the smartphones, of course, have apps that you download, some of which you even pay for, whose user agreement, if you take a look at the end user agreement, specifically says, we are going to turn on your camera, and we're going to turn on your phone and your microphone, and we're going to capture everything that you do, and we're going to sell it. That's in the end user license agreement for every app that you download on your smartphone. Okay, this one is a dumb phone, but it still tracks my every movement, and it still has a microphone that they can turn on remotely. Okay, so imagine Napoleon's police state with this kind of technology, is what Bertrand Russell was saying. That was in 53, so that was, 60 years ago?
Before digital.
Yeah, way before digital. And then if we fast forward a little bit to 1958, we get Aldous Huxley appearing on, a CBS program where he talks about the encroaching tyranny, the scientific tyranny. And then in 1962, he goes and lectures to Berkeley, the University of Berkeley, where he basically says, yeah, we've been engineering this the whole century, and there's, it's here, it's done, it's a done deal, there's no way to get away from it, and you all are part of it, whether you like it or not. And then he passed away just shortly after that lecture. So, this is the way that they control and manipulate us. They manipulate our emotions, they manipulate our instincts, they manipulate the actual way that we process information. They do all of that stuff. And, back in Aristotle's time, it would have been fairly subtle, and you'd have to, you'd show up at the theater to watch the play, and that would be your mind control, your program. Now, of course, it's everywhere. 100,000 hits a day, minimum, probably more now because of all the additional channels that we have available to us. It's in the video games, it's in the movies, it's in the TV programs, it's in the advertisements, it's in the text. Okay? They actually go to school to learn how to write propaganda pieces to control and shape and manipulate opinion. So if you take a look at articles, any article that's written, you will be able to see these basic propaganda principles repeated again and again and again and again and again. And you'll be able to see how they are subtly beginning to shape your opinion. Okay? Even in text.
Well, that's a college education.
What's that?
Learning how to spin.
Oh, it's
Anytime you hand in a paper,
yeah.
it was always geared to the teacher his life
Sure,
to get that A.
sure,
And
exactly.
And the more you go to it, they encourage college education.
Yes, and this, of course, is postdoctorate stuff. You're not going to get this unless you go to Harvard, and you're going to pay about $80,000 a semester.
Yeah, but as you start at the